Welcome, everybody. I've got Steve here to talk about the Premier to Hoth format for the upcoming Retro League. So we put together just a little guide here. If you haven't played this format in 20 years, 25 years, here's some cards to know. Here's some things to think about. Here's some mechanics. But we did some math here, and there's around 700 total cards in the card pool. So that's 350-ish per side, which I know can be daunting. So we're here to help you cut through the crap and figure out what you need to actually think about in deck building and what you might kind of encounter. Steve, welcome back on. So you're the tournament director here.
Yeah,
I am. Thanks for doing this for the fourth year, right?
No problem.
Do you want to talk a little bit about why Premier to Hoth is just a really great entry point? If you haven't played in a long time, it's a great way of kind of learning the rhythm of the game, how it works on AMP as well. So we can kind of talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, as a lot of you who've played for a while know, and then for those who are getting back into it, you'll soon realize Star Wars CCG began as a complex but manageable game. It got more and more complicated over time. More systems, cards, rules, exceptions, and so forth. So beginning with Premier, A New Hope, and Hoth, those three main expansion sets and a couple of smaller supplemental things, is a more manageable card pool. It's just starting locations. You don't have objectives, starting interrupts, all that stuff that came later. So it's just starting locations, play characters, battle, interrupts, back and forth. It's the basics of the game. So I think it's a really good way to learn the fundamentals. And it's also important because once you get to the later sets, you see how the later sets tried to change or in some cases fix things from the first few sets. But Premier Hoth is, we think, the most balanced of the early ways to play the game. There are definitely some powerful cards to be aware of, but there's solutions for pretty much everything. So this video will not be an exhaustive guide. It's beyond the scope of a 15-20 minute video, but we'll try to highlight some things to think about in some different categories when you're getting back into this, maybe a refresher for people who played a while back.
Great. So we're starting with light side here. We'll do dark side as well, but this is the sort of some relevant cards to think about that maybe you might be less familiar with, or sort of interactions, things you're going to see. So starting off with maybe the Hoth stuff. So Hoth included, which is a really cool format. But how do the Hoth rules work?
Rules. Yes, that's one thing that you need to understand is how deploying to Hoth works, because a lot of people will either on light side or actually be playing with Hoth. The Hoth energy shield rules are that the sites are laid out in order of markers: first marker, second marker, third marker, and so on. Those are the exterior Hoth sites. And then after the first marker, lower than that, you have the echo base sites. So the energy shield on Hoth protects the echo base sites and first, second, and third marker, meaning that the dark side cannot deploy to those sites. They can move at sites from beyond the energy shield and move in, but they can't deploy to those sites. What this also means is if the light side deploys the energy, the main power generators, then you need to create an outer boundary for the shield. So they need to first check to see if the dark side has played marker 4, 5, or 6, or 7. If the dark side is not, the light side must immediately pull out the north ridge, which we placed here. So it's all slightly complicated. Just to say that if you are the light side and you start the main power generators as your starting location, and you see if the dark side also has a Hoth marker 4, 5, 6, or 7. If they don't, then you can immediately pull the north ridge from your deck, and you get 2 locations for the price of 1 as your starting location. So that's I think the simplest way I can explain it. So the dark side cannot deploy under the shield, but they can move. They can deploy to the outermost marker, and then they can march in one side at a time. Dark side can't like land ships under the shield. Can't use cards like Elis Hellrot to shuttle over there, things like that.
Yeah, or spies as well. They can't.
Or spies, right?
In the Echo war room there.
Correct.
Okay. So that's the basics of the Hoth Shield rules.
Right.
What are some other kind of, starting with maybe the beginning, your starting locations? You have Obi's
Yeah.
Hut,
Yeah.
Oven Throne Room. Why do
Yep.
these cards matter?
So the locations I've shown here, these are the most common light side starting locations based on the data we pulled from last year's Premier Hoth event. Why are these all useful? Well, because locations in the Premier Hoth format, whether you're playing light side or dark side, are really based upon giving yourself a force generation advantage, sometimes called Twix sites, like two for me, none for you. So a lot of people are going to start locations that give themselves two force icons and no force icons for the opponent. The game will later shift more towards battleground locations and then the later sets where because the other cards incentivize that, they're developed later on. But in the early game, you're trying to get a force advantage. So you're mostly playing, you're trying to minimize the number of sites you play that give your opponents force icons. And you're almost always starting ones that give yourself force and not your opponent. And these are the best ones for that. Obi-Wan's Hut is a classic. It gives Obi-Wan a very cheap deploy there. He deploys for only 2 force because he's 5 normally, -3. The Echo Command Center is a war room, so there's some war room things you can do. It's got some slightly relevant game text, but it's also protected under the energy shield. That's good. The Oven 4 Throne Room, if this is your starting location, lets you go first. So you do only get to activate 1, but you have the opportunity to lay down more sites and do some more things before the dark side can get in there. That's a popular starting location for the Throne Room main strategy of it's played a lot in this format. The Masaesi War Room is probably the least popular of the big ones, but still played as a starting location. It's another 2 for me, none for you. It has some slightly relevant game text with TIE Fighters 4 for value, but not super important.
Yeah.
Finally, yeah. Dantooine is your best location if you're playing space, which is a viable strategy for light side, particularly for capital starships, deploying quite cheap there. It is a little bit lower on your force activation, but it's an important one to consider if you're playing space.
Yeah, just a comment there on why force generation is so important. Yeah, obviously resource management in every CCG is really important, but I think in these early formats, you can just get absolutely strangled if you don't have the ability. And there's less tricks to get around force generation. So you really need to find ways of building up your economy, if you will, and getting those resources so you can get cards down. So it can just get like really nasty if you're sort of strangled. And we have a Cardio Revolution that maybe we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah, we will. Right.
Strangle cards.
But there's just almost no ways to pull locations from your deck in Premier through Hoth. So you're reliant on drawing them. So if the luck of the draw doesn't come in your favor and you started with only one force icon, or you're giving your opponent 1 as well, and maybe they start with 2 and you get none, they could be at a 3-1 advantage to you. That's pretty bad. So yeah.
Okay, let's move on to some red cards here. What are the ones we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, well, Sense and Altar are the classic cards that people need to know about in this format. They're the sort of counter spells, to use magic terminology. Sense cancels interrupts or reacts, but primarily interrupts. And Altar cancels effects. You need to draw a destiny less than the ability of your highest ability character on table. That's usually you're trying to get a Jedi down, like Obi-Wan, usually for light side, or always for light side this format, or Vader for dark side. You're trying to draw under them. Sometimes you'll get away with playing somebody with like ability 4, like Luke on the light side, or somebody like Jasper on the dark side. But anyway, if you can establish the ability to reliably play Sense and Altar early, you can be shutting down most of what your opponent's doing. The other thing to be aware of is that Altar cancels Sense, and Sense cancels Altar without a destiny draw. So this is going to lead to situations where you have a Sense Altar war, which means, let's say I'm dark side, I play an interrupt, I play sniper, try to kill one of your characters. Light side plays Sense, dark side responds with Altar, light side plays Sense again. It goes back and forth until one person had more of those in their hand than the other. And then the person who played the last one of those will cancel and go to the lost pile all of their opponents' Altar or Sense. And then you get to put all of yours in the used pile. that's just a massive swing where you could suddenly put 3 or 2, 3 cards in your used pile. Your opponent loses those cards. It's a big swing of cards, but also you just crippled their ability to respond to your stuff with Censor Altar. So one Censor Altar war that you win could decide the game in many cases.
And I think this is one of the reasons why Premier Solo is kind of a bad format, right?
Yeah.
And that we added in a New Hope for this thing we call grabbers.
Right. We can talk about grabbers.
So
what I'll say is that anytime you play an interrupter effect that's not immune to alter or sense, you need to try to think about how many outs your opponent has, how many copies of Censor Altar you think they have in their hand, based on their hand size, what you've seen them play so far. If you think they're running a heavy Censor Altar deck, to see if you can get away with it, and if you can't get away with playing it, if you can win a Sense Altar war and then prevail and get your card in play. So yeah. Grabbers. Grabbers are cards that are going to take an interrupt that's being played out of your opponent's deck and stack it on that card. The better of the two is this one. What are you trying to push on us? Because it's going to take that interrupt and stack it there. And every new interrupt of the same type, they first have to stack it there and use an additional force for every copy in the stack. That is going to be... it's going to pull those Censor Altars or some other interrupts we'll talk about later out of their deck, so that it'll reduce the number they have access to and make them more expensive to play. And then your opponents have to choose between playing Censor Altar and paying 2 or 3 force for it, or playing other things. The big drawback of what you're trying to push on us is the 3 force to deploy it on table. In later sets, there's a way to make it free, but in this set, you have to pay the 3 force. So you have to store up force for that, which you got to think about that.
And many times you might need to wait until your opponent's turn because maybe they're going to do an action on their
right.
So I will say, coming back to this format, the Sense Altar War thing was like the most jarring because I was like, oh, I'm going to play some characters and some vehicles and some sites, and then I was like, wait, what's going on? Like, it can get pretty nasty pretty quickly. So my recommendation for folks is just to include some grabbers in your deck to sort of try to prevent that.
Yeah.
So you don't.
The other grabber, quickly grappling hook, it stacks one of them there, but only costs you 1 force to play it. It doesn't stack more copies of it, but it does make it unique. That's most important for the Sense Altar War, because then if they try to sense one of your cards, you play Altar to cancel their sense. They then can't play another copy of Sense because it's unique. It can only be played once per turn.
Yeah. So those are 2 good options there. And I'll also note that when we go through Dark Side cards, you're going to see that these are mirrored, right?
Yes,
so there's
exactly.
Dark Side equivalent as well.
Yep.
All right, let's finish out our red cards here. We have, I think, Grimtash, Revolution, a few other ones here. Yeah,
let's talk about hand management for a second. It's really important in this format because there's very few ways for you to pull cards from your deck, download or tutor, or whatever you want to call it. So you're typically just drawing blind off the top of your force pile. So Grimtash does 2 things. The used part is if an opponent has 13 or more cards in hand, you're going to play this as a used interrupt, and they're going to place all but 3 random selection in their used pile. So that means that most people are going to try to avoid drawing above 12 cards into their hand, and you should probably avoid that as well, because this card is extremely commonly played in multiples in people's decks. And because it's going to randomly select cards from your hand, it can just foil your entire plan if you draw more than 12. If you draw more than 12, you're really pushing your luck. I've done it. I'll do it from time to time if I'm really in a bad spot. I'm just desperately looking for a card, but it more often than not, people are going to play Grimtash, or it's a dark side version called Monarch on you. The second part of this, the
Lost. I was going to say the Lost is more devastating even.
The Lost can be more devastating because playing 4 force, revealing your opponent's hand, all cards opponent has 2 or more copies of in hand are lost. It's a way to keep things honest, and there's some dark side cards that are running heavy multiples that you're going to want to get rid of. So sometimes you're going to get a hunch that your opponent is holding on to multiple copies of, like Scanning Crew, or even a card like a TIE Fighter or Imperial Walker or something they're running as part of the strategy for multiple copies. You play that and you just strip all those out of their hand. It could be an automatic game over for an opponent. So if you are playing a deck that relies on multiple copies of the same card, you want to try to manage your hands. You don't keep too many in your hand at once, even if that means maybe deploying them at not the most optimal time. Just try to manage that so you don't lose them all.
Yeah, I mean, this has happened to me before where I had a couple copies of Vader, right? There's like a
Oh
limited
yeah.
card pool. Like, how many good cards do you have, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
I have 2 Vaders and 2 Tarkins. This is great. I like, and then this happens, and suddenly like your entire
Yeah.
strategy is out. So definitely,
Yeah.
be
So
aware of that.
offensively, like I'll use it sometimes as well. It's like I got a feeling that guy's holding on to a couple copies of Vader or something. Why I haven't seen Vader. It's got to be in his hands. He's played. Sometimes you can strip him. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Also gain like valuable intel about what they got in their hand, right?
Yes.
So what's coming.
Yes.
Okay, let's finish up. I think we have Revolution, a few other ones here.
Yeah, quickly. Revolution is infamous card in this format. It straight up flips a site over so that you're activating off of the dark side and you're force draining off of the light side icons. So very common is for people to start one of these 2 for me, none for you sets like Obi-Wan's Hut. They'll deploy Obi-Wan there for cheap. They'll drop a Revolution, flip it, and then begin force draining for a ton with maybe Obi-Wan and a saber there. So that's pretty common. Another thing that people will do is more, although that's also offensively, but even sort of more offensively, as it'll drop a Revolution on the first turn and revolve the dark side's only sight, and that, or actually it could be sight or system. So to revolve the dark side's only location, so that could end the game for you there. I mean, it could really cripple you. So you're only activating maybe 1 force a turn. And you're just desperately hunting for more locations. If you didn't draw any in your opening hand, you're in a really bad spot. Fortunately, the dark side has a card called Evader from the New Hope set, which cancels Revolution and makes them lose force for doing it. So you're going to want, dark side's going to want to run some copies of Evader most likely.
You'll find a lot of this format is almost like a hedging or almost like wagering.
Yep.
Like mentally, I'm wondering, do they have a Grim Tash in their hand? Like, can I draw up to 13 or 4? There's a lot of this like balance because people assume you're running grabbers, and then maybe you can get away with running 1 less than you would have because people assume you run 3 or 4. And by the way, we'll have some deck lists in the video description, and there'll be more resources about specific sort of deck lists that people can run coming out.
It's got a bit of a poker feel almost in this sense. You're figuring out how many outs you have, how many copies do you think they still have this card, what's the likelihood they got this, they got multiples, things like that. It's really interesting trying to get people's headspace and sort of read their hand. That doesn't happen as much later in the game, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree. All right, we have Undercover, just a few more so we can get the dark side stuff here.
Let's talk about spies then really quickly. Spies are very important in this format, and they're more relevant for light side than dark side. Light side has more spies, they have better spies, with one exception the dark side has. Because both players are relying a lot on non-battlegrounds, on sites with icons for me, none for you. You're going to want to drop spies on some of those unprotected sites and then begin forcing them there, which is great. Because, once your opponent plays some of his biggest characters, Vader or whatever, Tarkin, then you know that he's less likely to be able to move Vader over to a non-battleground site. So you could drop, a spy, another character, and start forcing that. That's great. The other thing you can do is you can use Undercover, which is to deploy a spy and then make them undercover, which means that they go to the other side of the site and then they block force strands. Also really important to do. So R2-D2 is a great spy. He has some cool game text. Mama Nadon is good because he can't be scanning crewed, and he also has a decently high defense value. Leia's a good defense value, and so on. Jerome Webb is cheap to deploy, so forth.
Okay, and then Tantive 4 to wrap things up.
Tantive 4 is a spy. Is basically a spy ship. It can deploy where you have no presence, which is important because you can deploy to the Death Star immediately and begin draining them there.
Do you want to quickly talk about the R2, what are these the droid you're looking for combo?
How do we get into this mess, you mean, right?
Yeah, how do we get in this mess? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So because there's very few ways to pull cards from your deck, you often end up in situations where you have a like miserable hand, and the cards you need are all in your deck. So this card lets you basically cycle your hand back into your deck and draw an entirely new hand with +1 card. If you have a Vajroyded Scomp Link, and if it's R2 or C3PO, you can get an additional card when you place your entire hand in your use pile and draw that many cards off the top of your reserve deck. And if you're really good, you can use this to also, with tracking, to try to like get yourself to a certain destiny number before you draw destiny, and so forth. So yes, there's a whole Light archetype built around cycling your hand and getting the cards you need to using How Do We Get Into This Mess.
Yeah, and that little Scomp Links, as a reminder, that little circle icon right by
there, for instance,
Docking Bays, War Room, is that little thing next to the red planet. So,
yep, it's also on a lot of ships too.
Yeah, that's true.
So R2 can be on board a ship, like this ship has a Scomp Link, and you can do it there.
Yeah. All right.
And you're not going to C3 was not very good, so usually you do it with R2D2 because he has a cool destiny number and he does a few other interesting things as well in his game text.
Yeah, R2 is pretty underrated, I think.
Yep. Mantilian Sovrip, last thing for light side, really important card. Lets you a card you want to protect using your sense to get rid of their altars. It lets you, after you lose battles, get rid of cards from your hand to pay for attrition and battle damage. And because light side is weaker than dark side pretty clearly in this format, you might be losing some battles. So being able to not lose all your guys and lose cards from your hand instead is useful. Very useful.
That is like a prime target for altar.
Yep. You got to protect it.
Prime target.
Revolution 2. Yep.
Yeah, 2 big targets there. All right, let's get into dark side here a little bit. And I think a lot of this will be mirrored. You'll see similar cards, but the sort of the dark side.
Absolutely. So yeah, I don't want to talk about things. Some of the concepts are exactly the same. Again, you got your good locations, 2 for me, none for you. The Death Star is a really interesting location. 3 for me, none for you. Immune to revolution, but let's say go first in the game. And if they can get there, and you can't protect it with ships, they're going to get a fat 4-strain against you. So it's an interesting choice to make whether to start that location or not. But if you are afraid of revolution, that might be what you want.
So some of the fun red cards, I think dark side has way more fun cards in Hoth. Very thematic.
Oh, by the way, I'll just say that Ice Plains is a really good starting location. 2 for me, none for you. It's exterior, and you can set up a nice strategy with the mountains where you can move for free back and forth. Yeah, so that was fun.
Yeah, and like Wampa Cave's not bad either.
Yeah. Interiors, you can't put your walkers there, so if you're doing a walker deck, it's useful, but not as your starting location. But yeah, it's cool. It's good too.
Wampas themselves are terrible, though.
Don't run Wampas.
There's no reason to do that.
Run Ice Storms instead, because those are really good.
Yeah, so there's a lot of fun red cards here for dark side. I think starting with sort of the Walker package, Walker Garrison, Trample. These are just awesome thematic cards.
Trample's like my favorite card in the entire game. It's so cool. Right. It's a very fair card. You have a giant ATST or AT-AT. It should be able to step on some stuff. Straight Destiny draw. And use Interrupt with a good Destiny number. I love this card. Gets rid of Undercover Spies, too, because it can target any character at the site. So this is a prime way to get rid of your life. It's Undercover Spies. Same for Sniper, which can be used with weapons, including lightsabers, to get rid of Undercover Spies.
And since it's your control phase as well, there's like a very strategic time.
Yes.
You just have like a total beatdown that happens.
Yep, snipe them, 4-strain, beatdown, or whatever you want to do afterwards. It's very good. Walker Garrison, I just love this card also. It's almost like a proto-objective. If you can manage to have AT-ATs at 3 different Hoth sites, you get 4-strain +2 at all Hoth locations this turn. And that's all Hoth locations, not just exterior locations, not just locations where you have AT-ATs. And you don't have to have AT-ATs control. So just get AT-ATs at 3 locations, and then you can be draining for +2 at the Wampa Cave, at the Hoth system, every Hoth location.
Yeah, that's like one little mechanic coming back to the game I forgot. Like, even if they don't have icons, you can still 4-strain for 0, right? And so this could be Wampa Cave suddenly you're 4-straining for 2 because it's +2. So
absolutely, yes.
You can get that set up. It's basically a game ender for light.
Yeah, especially if you can get 2. I've played a Walker Garrison deck for a few years. If you can pull off 2 Walker Garrisons, I think you just definitely win the game. If you get 1, you're in a really good spot because it's just a huge backbreaking 4-strain.
Okay, 2 other things. We obviously have Sense and Alter, Dark Side version, mirror the cards.
Circle's now complete. You've got to know this card. This is how the dark side takes out Obi-Wan. So if Vader Obi-Wan present, begin a duel, the loser of the duel is placed out of play. And you're comparing power. Vader has a power of 6, Obi has a power of 5. So with their base stats, Vader always wins. Plus 2 characters armed with a lightsaber. So that is, again, if Obi's a lightsaber, Vader does not. Obi wins. If they both have lightsabers, Vader wins. There's lightsaber proficiency, which can help as well. But yeah, Obi is very vulnerable to this card, and he's often just taken out of play. And out of play in this game means you can't play any more copies of him afterwards, even if you have more in your deck. So it's not the same thing as Exile Magic the Gathering. It's not just out of the graveyard. It's out of the game. Play no more copies.
It can be absolutely backbreaking, especially in the Premier only format where you have no other characters, right?
Yeah,
It's like, I'm bringing 4 copies of Obi, now it's worthless.
Yep. So often it's trying to outmaneuver, get Obi away from Vader in this format.
All right, a few other interrupts here. Scanning Crew is probably the most.
Scanning Crew is, this is super notorious. Yeah, super notorious. Use 1 force, glance at the cards in your opponent's hand for 10 seconds, move 1 rebel you find at the top of opponent's used pile. So this card is obviously the best against mains decks where you're running powerful key characters, Obi, Luke, Han, and people will run many copies of this. So your best defense is obviously, like, if you can get the sense, if you can get sense set up early, that's good. But often this will be in the people's hands. First turn, they'll remove Obi-Wan from your hand. So grabbing it will be pretty important, because if you start grabbing these, it can become too expensive for them to play them anymore. So that's one way to do it. Also, if your deck is relying on other strategies like starships, or you're playing with more different rebels, then that can be useful. So it's just something. It's a bad card that you have to deal with. I don't know if you have any other tips for dealing with Scanning Crew.
It's a good card for a grabber, right? That's a good one. If you think they're running a bunch, because some people do run 6 of them or something. It's just very obnoxious.
You can Grimtosh it as well. So if you think they're playing a big Scanning Crew deck, you can Grimtosh those out of their hand as well.
Yeah, so there are some counters there. Moving on to characters, maybe. I think. Yeah,
I think Darkseid has got better characters. People know Darth Vader. They know Grand Moff Tarkin. I didn't put them all in here, but the DS61-2, DS61-3, those are good characters because they had 3 of the power of the ships they pilot, and they have little TIE fighters that they can draw Destiny with. Those are all good. I put the spies in here just to compare that the dark side has spies that are not very good compared to the light side. U3PO is obviously amazing because he's a built-in undercover spy. Every dark side deck will run him. You can expect every dark side deck will deploy him to block your key force drain. That's why light side in this format has R3PO, which if you run a copy of it, you get him down, you can deploy where he has U3PO, and they'll lose 4 force every turn. So I like running R3PO. But beyond U3PO, their best spy is Garindan. Labria is okay as well. But this probe droid is not really playable because you have to have Star Destroyers on table, and that's just really clunky to have the Star Destroyer first and get the probe droid. So people don't really run this very often. And this guy's okay, but he's kind of expensive. He appears more later on during ISB decks. But anyway, the light side typically runs more spies than the dark side does. So that means the dark side needs to be more prepared to deal with undercover spies than light side typically. Light side just want to run this guy pretty much to deal with U3PO.
Finally, some ships. Victory class Star Destroyer from A New Hope is pretty good. A little cheaper.
Yeah, a lot of new players they just think they should run the Imperial class Star Destroyer because it's quote unquote better. But no, the Victory class is actually better because it has a more reasonable deploy cost. Its power is still 6, which is better than anything that the light side has. And it adds 1 to your power in battles related to planet sites, which can be relevant with the Hoth system. So yes, I like this much more. And most people run Victory class on Imperial class in this format.
And then Imperial Walker. I mean, there's some cool stuff like General Veers and this stuff. But this is just like a really great. Goes down from 4, power 4, can't hit with a lightsaber. Just like pretty fun. Yeah,
and I put this here just to remind people if you want to play walkers. This is the generic walker you want to use, not the Blizzard Walker, the one that's like has 3 dots in front of its name, because that one has no permanent pilot, and it's very clunky. It's more expensive, more clunky. This has got the stats are right here. You'll also run, if you're playing walkers, Blizzard 2, Blizzard 1. Those are obviously. I didn't need to put this in. And then for Star Destroyers, yeah, you can run the named Imperial class Star Destroyers like Stalker, Tyrant, and Devastator. But yeah, for generics, you want to run the Victory class.
Yeah, and cards like Ozzel are really, really good. I mean,
Yep.
Admiral Ozzel, I think, is an underrated card.
Oh yeah, I didn't. This is not an exhaustive list of it by any means. Yeah, Ozzel is good. His zero Destiny number is lame, but otherwise he's amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's about all the time we have for today on this deck list or kind of guide. We hope to see you guys all in the retro format. Or retro league rather. There's about a week left in the sign up. We'll also include some lists there for how to sign up. If you're just stumbling across this video, this sounds really fun. I will be playing. Steve will be playing. A bunch of folks. I think we're over 50 registrants right now, so we're hoping to hit, I don't know, whatever, a goal. But thanks a lot, Steve. Any kind of final thoughts on this format?
No, it's a great introductory way to get back into the game and think through the complex strategies that are on offer.
Yeah, there's a lot here, but it's a great way to start back up and learn the sort of beat, counter beat, and flow of gameplay. And GEMP is a great platform for it. So
absolutely.
Thanks for hanging out, everybody. We'll catch you later, and we'll see you in the Retro League.